Hello and welcome. I got to try out the Poorhammer podcast Horde Mode rules variant for Warhammer 40k, and although I'm losing my voice, I could not wait any longer to talk about it. I'm really excited to talk about my experience with this, and I love Warhammer 40k. But Warhammer 40k has a big problem when it comes to playing with more than 2 players, but fewer than 4 players, or more than 4 players, but fewer than 6 players, etc. And that is that the more players you add in, the harder it is to balance a fun round out, a fun game. And you can do some weird swingy stuff like, hey, one person brings a 2,000 point list, the other 2 people bring a 1,000 point list and try to take them on, or you can do free-for-alls, and we had some fun doing that recently. But ultimately, there's not a good variation of the game for 3 players, or at least there wasn't, because now I think there absolutely is. And I suppose I have to say at this point that I really enjoy the Poorhammer podcast. My wife recently dragged me into Magic the Gathering, and so I've started trying to listen to their Magic podcast as well, Solely Singleton. But even if I didn't enjoy them, these rules already had me intrigued because of the idea of here's a cooperative game mode that you can play. And as we go through this video, I will have some pictures taken from some of it. I didn't record any of the games. We wanted to try and get used to the rule set first, but I will have some pictures that we took over the course of the 2 games that we played. And I really love the options this rule set gives. You play it very differently in some ways than you would play regular 40k, and it also makes it more fun for people that aren't super into the hobby to be able to be a part of the experience as well. And I want to get into all of that as we go. But first, let's talk about what the Horde Mode variant rule set is, what this mode is. Horde Mode, designed by the Poorhammer podcast, is a game mode that allows you to take any number of players and pit them against a AI, as it were. It's more of a flowchart, but AI is the easiest way to put it, of an enemy swarm or an enemy horde that is coming towards you that will spawn in every round with new units, depending on how many spawn points you have, and you, with your armies, will have to try and survive the onslaught. By not having a easy, like, hey, you win by wiping everything out, it really does put you on the back foot. And there are factions that I think normally you might not want to bring some of the units for these factions, but Horde Mode gives you a chance to really make them shine. In Game 2, I brought a blob of Necron warriors with an Overlord with Res Orb, a Cryptek, and 2 Crypto Thralls, and that was my whole list. And I just kept regenerating. It was an incredible feeling of, look, I'm not moving off this objective. The rest of the other 2 players can go and do other stuff. I'm not moving off this objective. I'm just going to fortify this position, and I'm just going to survive. And that's my entire goal. And there were some really fun things that developed from there. To add some added tweaks to it, you take the number of game that you're playing, like if you're playing a 1,000-point game or a 2,000-point game, and you split that among the players. So for a 1,000-point game, you can bring 333 points. That's not a lot of points depending on what army you're playing. And so it really makes you have to play smart with what you're picking. If you're playing a 2,000 point game, then you bring double that number and so on. And the number, of course, is different for the number of players you're using. If it's a 2-player game, then, well, you're going to want to bring 500 apiece for a 1,000 point game. And you can play it single player as well because of how well done the flowchart is for the AI, for the Horde. It makes perfect sense. The Horde is always going to attack the closest target. If it can shoot, it's going to shoot. If it can charge and fight, it's probably going to charge and fight. It's going to try and get to objectives. It's going to try and do other stuff. But at no point does it have army rules. It doesn't have detachment rules, and they can't use stratagems. So it makes it really simple, and in that way makes it really easy for someone that is considering getting into the game or that is looking at the rules and going, man, this is so complicated, to understand the basic rules of shoot and fight and charge and all that without having to get dragged down into detachment rules or army rules or anything like that. I almost said faction abilities because of older editions. Anyway, there are also added complications in the form of secondary objectives that you get every round and secret objectives that every player gets individually, as well as misery cards that can get drawn that will make things much more difficult, and the fact that the spawn is kind of random chance. It also allows you to use a bunch of different models if you want, instead of just using one horde. And I had a lot of fun coming up with different narrative reasons as to why different models might be the horde. We wound up going with Tyranids for the horde both times. both because it made it simpler for the person that was learning the rules and was playing as the Horde, which we'll get to in a minute, but also because I wasn't using my Tyranids for my chosen units, and so it made it easier to just use them. I'm really looking forward to running my Blood Angels as the Horde and saying, hey, yeah, they all fell to the Black Rage. It was a tragic psychic whiplash that went through the entire chapter, and they all fell to the Black Rage, and now they're the Horde. But I can take my kill teams, and I can use them to come in. We can use my wife's orcs or sisters. I can use my Necrons. It's really nice to just be able to go, what do I have on the shelf? Any of this could be Horde. And you can mix and match. If you're somebody that says, well, I don't want to mix the armies because it wouldn't make a lot of sense, just proxy. You can also use proxies. By the end of the second game, we had to use a lot of proxies because there were a lot of Tyrannofexes and Carnifexes on the board, and I don't have any of those models yet, and I wasn't going to go out and buy them and build them in the middle of a game, so we just proxied. And a Psychophage proxies pretty well as a Tyrannofex. It's not quite the right size, but it's pretty close. The other part of it, as said a minute ago, is that someone who doesn't know the rules of the game can learn them really easily by running the Horde, because they don't have to worry about tactics or anything like that. They can just roll. And so having that person play Tyranids both times made it much easier. And we even added in a fifth person that was curious about the hobby, and she kind of wants to play Age of Sigmar more than 40k, but it gave her an idea of how the different shooting things worked, and they split the spawn points between them. So each one got to control whatever spawned on one of the two spawn points. And that leads us, I guess, to my only real complaint. Up until round 5, I think that 2 spawn points for 3 players might be a little too easy. And there were ways we could have made it harder, right? We could have doubled spawns. We could have gone up brackets or things like that. But in our initial games, we kind of just wanted to try out everything and see how it feels. I think our next game will probably be either doubling one of the spawn points or putting a 3rd spawn point on the battlefield. We would have gotten overwhelmed much more quickly, but I feel like we were doing really well up until round 5. And I didn't mention earlier that it uses rounds, and as the rounds increase, things get more and more difficult as it goes. There's so much to this mode, even though the rules are relatively simple to understand, that I feel like I'm forgetting to mention things that are very important as we go through this. But with the way that the misery deck works, something going bad can go bad really quickly. Maybe on the misery deck you roll, and now everybody that would take a battle shock test of the good guys, the anti-horde side, they're going to fail those battle shock tests immediately, which is not great, right? But if they roll a 20 on the misery deck, then they get to draw 2 more misery cards, and that's rough. I think it's really fun having that option, but it makes it where when it ramps hard. I loved that aspect because I liked being on the back foot at all times, especially in the second game where I could just regenerate basically whenever I took damage. There were some really smart ways that the Horde was played to be able to get around that, and there was a whole turn where I was stuck in engagement range with a Trigon and didn't get to do anything because my Necrons aren't super great at fighting when all I have is a block of warriors. I think when you look at the way that these rules are put together, I'm not just going to sit here and say that the Poorhammer podcast like struck gold immediately, because I know it was a lot of work. They go into the process of how it worked and all the patrons that helped them, and I'm not a patron, just to clarify, but I think they did a really, really good job of making a really fun rule set, and I think with just a few more tweaks, it will be almost perfect. And it is already exactly what I wanted out of it. I like playing 40k against my wife or against other people in our play group. I enjoy doing that. But sometimes I don't want to play against somebody. Sometimes I want to use my army and create fun narrative situations where they're working together, where a Plasmancer is looking over at the Deathwatch Marine that just shot a Screamer Killer that is being proxied as a Trigon to be able to attack him, and he's got his little pointy finger and he's like, look at this thing, and it's just it's wonderful. The narrative moments that happen in a 40k game are some of my favorite things to happen, and Horde Mode really lends itself to those. I love this rule set, but as I said, I think it can be a little too easy. Now, part of that is that we had a Deathwatch player both games. He had only brought his Deathwatch army with him. Deathwatch is very good at taking down monsters, and we were fighting Tyranids. Part of it was that, right? The other part of it is that my wife plays orcs, and so it's very swingy. When she has a good turn, she has a very good turn. She has a bad turn, she has a very bad turn. So there were times where it felt like we were doing super well, and times where it felt like we weren't. The Horde in my first game hit my Death Company intercessors with disruption shots from Barb Gods and was able to land those. And I didn't get to charge the whole game because we called it in round 3 when it was clear we weren't going to be able to win anymore. And we were also on a little bit of a time crunch for that first game. But we played the second game all the way through to round 5, and it was wonderful. I think if I had to just pick out any other little problems that I have, some of the secret objectives are really hard to pull off, and it's supposed to be that way, right? Some of them are really easy, but there's some weird rules interactions that can happen where one player has a secret objective that is to have another player's warlord be destroyed, and so you have that subterfuge of subterfuge is how that word works, of trying to make sure that other player's warlord gets destroyed. That other player has a secret objective that is that their warlord lasts until the end of the round, or until the end of the game, but then they use a field promotion on the unit that has their warlord in it, which says it destroys that unit. Does that trigger the secret objective for the person who's got the secret objective that says the warlord's supposed to be destroyed? And does that fail the secret objective for the one that says that the warlord needs to survive if the warlord comes back to the battlefield as a new model? It gets a little squirrely that way, but look, this is 40K. Rules are always a little squirrely, so I don't blame them for this. I really love the sheer depth of options. I talked about the difficulty and how it's a little easy when you have 3 players with only 2 spawn points, but we would have probably lost a lot sooner were it not for the fact that we were giving each other RP. We were making sure that people could do field promotions to bring units back or to be able to get upgrades out. I got some death marks out right towards the end of the game, and they didn't do a lot, but they did a little, and that little was what we needed, you know? I think the way the rules interact together are really good, and it lends to a cooperative environment while also having that desire of like, no, but if I kill this unit, I'll get that requisition point. That resupply point, not requisition point, resupply point. And if I shoot it but can't kill it, he's going to get it. And I don't know if I want him to get that. I want that. So I'm just not going to shoot that enemy this turn. I'm going to shoot something else. And it leads to a really fun dynamic of we're helping each other, but also I want my stuff. I need to get mine. And I'm not getting mine if you're getting yours, so maybe I'm not going to help you get yours this time because I want to get mine. So let's talk about the 2 games. I've talked about the rules a lot. They're really good. They're free to download. You should go check them out for sure. I'll put a link in the description to the episode of the Poorhammer podcast about the Horde Mode and all the stuff there. It's really, really good. I really believe you should check it out. Even if you're just looking for something casual to play, I'm already looking to try and set it up on Tabletop Simulator to be able to play on there. I'm very excited for that. But let's talk about the 2 games and my experiences there. So the first game, I brought Death Company. I brought a Chaplain, I brought a Death Company Dreadnought, and I brought a set of 5 Death Company Intercessors. That was very expensive point-wise, and it was all of my points. The rest of our play group was my wife's orcs, and then also the Death Company player that I mentioned earlier. And they had a pretty solid setup. The Death Company player brought a kill team, and so he had a lot of units that were kind of spread out, but they were just one squad, really, right? And then my wife brought a kill rig, I think? No, that was the second game. She brought a... what did she bring originally? She got a battle wagon through reinforcement. But originally she brought boys and a squig buggy, which isn't bad, right? Not a bad choice. Squig buggy for some good blast, and some indirect fire. Boys for some good grabbing objectives, things like that. I got locked down hard in the first game. The Barb Gaunts reduced my movement, which made it really hard for me to get there. We had chosen Hammer and Anvil, but I deployed back in the Hammer and Anvil because I expected deep strikes. And that's because I played too much regular 40K, and the Horde can get deep strike stuff, but it didn't right away. My Death Company Dread was able to get in and do some good work. The Deathwatch player brought a Brutalis Dreadnought for that fight. And we wound up at one point with Death Company Dread and Brutalis Dread side by side, blocking a kill box. It was great. Didn't get to kill a lot of stuff, but I had a lot of fun. And like I said, we called it on round 3, battle round 3, because it didn't really look like we were going to be able to pull off a win, and also because we were on a time crunch. The second game to me is far more interesting, and I didn't get anywhere near as many pictures of the first game, mostly because I was trying to learn all the rules and make sure we were doing everything right. In the second game, I brought my Necrons, as I said earlier, and we had 3 squads brought by the Deathwatch player, and then my wife brought the Squig Buggy, as well as a mech gun, and a mech boy, I think is what he's called. I am not an Orcs player. Please don't crucify me, comments. It was a really, really fun game. The Horde kept getting big bugs right from the beginning. The first game, they got Termagants, and they got Barb Gaunts and stuff like that. But in the second game, they rolled really high every time, and they got big bugs on the table right away. We had Screamer Killers. We had the Swarm Lord. We had the Neuro Tyrant. We had the Norn Emissary twice. Carnifexes. A Trigon. It was really cool. And again, you may say, well, then why are you talking about the difficulty and the spawn points and everything when you had all of that and you survived to round 5? Mostly because I think 3 players makes surviving to round 5 something that's probably going to happen more often than not. Now, granted, the Horde was rolling pretty poorly early on. However, they were able to wipe a full squad of Deathwatch, and they took my Necrons almost completely down. I just rolled really high on my res, so I was able to get everybody back. But I had a ton of fun in the second game, and the second game was really special because, again, we had 2 different people that did not know how to play the game, that split up the Horde and each played a different spawn point, and so they got used to the rules as we went, and you would hear one of them saying, yeah, that's AP 3, okay, so I need to roll this. And it was just really cool to see people learn in real time without also having to juggle detachment rules, army rules, stratagems, and all that stuff. Because my play group is still really new to 10th as well, right? I've played very few games of 10th. I think I'm on, if we count the Horde Mode games as 10th, I think I'm on my 7th game. I have not played a lot of 10th. So we're still all learning it together, and there are things we're getting wrong. And it was really nice to be able to just have a few data sheets to focus on, to be able to really learn those data sheets, and to be able to know that stuff moving forward, right? Like, I made a lot of mistakes in my first Necrons game because I couldn't remember what was 1d6, what was 1d3, how are they all revived, you know, what exactly is the effect of the Res Orb, when do I reanimate? Playing them like this, I got reanimation down. I'm good for reanimation for the rest of this edition as long as they don't change it. So I think this mode has a lot of utility, not just in teaching new players that are interested in the hobby how to play and giving them something easier to play, but also experienced players, letting them be able to really focus down on a rule set or a couple units that maybe they don't use a lot. You can say, well, those are your Necron warriors and your Overlord. You should know those rules, Trey. Well, yeah, but you got to remember, I'm a Blood Angels player, first and foremost. I started Blood Angels 2 editions ago. I picked up Necrons this edition. I'm still working my way through them. I haven't even gotten a game in as my Tyranids yet. Getting to see what they can do as the Horde was the most I knew about Tyranids for this edition. So, it is really fun. It is really cool in the way that it lets you get a lot of extra skills you might not have thought about and lets you introduce new players to it. And at this point, I'm just rambling, but I really love this mode, and I encourage you, if you are somebody that really wants to play cooperative while still being a little bit competitive with 40K, or you just want to be able to get models on the table, to be able to see what cool models, especially if you're a kill team player, which is how my wife started. We have a bunch of kill teams. We could do a Horde mode where we just get to see what all those kill teams do over the course of a full game of Horde mode. And I'm really excited to play more. Like I said, the only little things I would fix is maybe add in for like, hey, for 3-player games, you might want to consider another spawn point, or you might want to consider upping the points a little bit or going up a bracket or adding one to the rolls. Because once it started ramping, it was really fun trying to figure out how we're going to get through it and everything. But early on, we were kind of wrecking those bugs, even though they were really big. However, like I said, part of that could have just been luck on our part and unluck on the part of the Horde. I really want to get some more games in and see. I would just maybe add that as an optional rule, but maybe other playtesters and maybe you in the comment section could tell me how that wasn't a problem you ran into. And then again, as I mentioned, the destroy your unit to be able to bring them back with a field promotion, that one was a little murky on how the rules work there with the other secret objectives. But it's worth checking out in my opinion. If Brad and Eric are watching and they see this, thanks so much for making this mode. I had been looking for a long time for something that I could play with my wife or with the rest of the play group that didn't involve us just having to shoot each other all the time. And mostly because it's a really small play group, right? We play against each other armies a couple times. We know what everybody could do. We want to do some other stuff, you know? So I really appreciate this. And I am 100% on board with playing more and giving more feedback. I'm so stoked to see where this game mode ends up. And I can easily say that this will be something that my group will probably play more than 40K at this point, because when we finished the second game, everybody was talking, well, we can set it up on TTS where we can play it, right? And then we can just play Horde mode that way, right? We're gonna start setting up like a 1 weekday out of the month to be able to just get some Horde games in. You hooked us. We got to keep going. I'm already looking at getting another army to be able to play them as the Horde or as use them against the Horde. I don't need a 5th army. Oh, this plastic crack addiction that we have. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Hopefully you'll check this mode out. I think it's absolutely worth checking out. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been the Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that Horde mode has to offer.